This podcast is sponsored by Xgrowth. Xgrowth is the APAC ABM agency. If you and your organization are looking to land and expand enterprise and mid-market deals, Xgrowth is the agency to help. Xgrowth works with a wide range of international and global technology vendors, service providers, and B2B SaaS companies. If this sounds like something you're interested to know more about, make sure to check out Xgrowth at xgrowth.com.au. That's xgrowth.com.au and chat with the APAC ABM agency.
What's up, marketers, and welcome to another episode of the Growth Colony podcast. I'm Liza from Xgrowth to tell you that each episode we bring in B2B leaders to chat about how you can achieve those everyday wins in the marketing world. Whether you're new to the B2B game, working at a leadership level, or even just showing some interest, we know you'll love the episode. So grab a drink, get comfy, and enjoy the show.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode. I'm Shaheen Hoda with Xgrowth, and today I'm talking to Rachel Tier, Head of Global ABM and Customer Lifecycle Marketing at Cloud Software Group. For those of you who are like, who's Cloud Software Group? Cloud Software Group is basically Citrix and TIBCO merging together. Those are two main players, and I believe there are a couple other players as well, but the two main players were Citrix and TIBCO. And now we have the Cloud Software Group. So very big account. So there's a lot to learn here. And we're going to be talking about account and vertical selection for your ABM program. I usually say 50% of the success of any account-based program is based on the selection of the right accounts. And if you get that wrong, you're going to have a real hard time getting results. So I'm excited to chat to Rachel about exactly that and understanding her process when it comes to account selection. On that note, let's dive in. Rachel, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to talk about this topic.
Yeah, really excited. And you know, it's there's a little bit of a mystery around it. I feel like different people approach it differently when it comes to either vertical selection or account selection. So let's start from the very beginning. And I'd like to ask you, where do you start with account vertical selection for an ABM program?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a really big question, and I realize, this is where we have to start. But ultimately, whatever it is that you're doing with account-based marketing, this is going to be focused on growth. So before you even think about some of the detail that sits underneath that, you've got to really understand what your definition of growth actually is. Do you have the right definition? Do you have an agreed definition? Is what you're trying to achieve with the ABM account program actually the right definition that the sellers understand and the sellers are bought into, and it's ultimately laddering up to the strategy of your business? So if you've got those three in place, then you've got a really good foundation to start thinking about what it is that you're trying to do and how to try and select those accounts. So, there's a really good mantra that actually Bev Burgess talks about, which is that 20% of your customers are generating 80% of your revenue. So, the reason I'm saying that is because often it's about, oh my goodness, we have to think about the entire install base. What does that look like? Or if you're using this for opportunity generation or it's net new logo generation, it's like, what's the size of your universe? So before you start, panicking and thinking, oh my goodness, we've got to think about everybody, it's what is the definition of growth? And remember that 20% of your customers are generating 80% of your revenue. So the other piece of this that when we start out is that, we're looking at the 4 R's. So reputation, relationship, and revenue, but we also look at retention. So this is about understanding that you have your customer base, but you need to keep your customers, you need to retain your customers, and there's often growth opportunities that are in that. So it's about that too. And also it's looking about, where can ABM play best? Where can you move the needle? So, rather than creating something that is beautifully baked, contains everything that you could absolutely ever possibly think about, This is about actually, maybe you need to start small. Maybe you need to think about what is it that you can actually measure. So thinking about where ABM can play best and where and how you can move the needle quickest is often a good way to think about it. And then moving into like the verticals, the reason that we're landing on verticals is that because it's a really good way to think about ensuring that you're speaking the customer language. So, but then that's only going to work if that's the way your sales teams are organized. Do they have industry specialism? Do you have experts within your company that can talk to vertical specialisms? How are you actually going to address that practically within your overall strategy for the business? And then thinking about layering in what I'm sure many of us face, which is our business imperative. So again, that's another way of adding into that account selection criteria is about thinking about business imperatives, products that are being used, products that aren't being used that have got expansion opportunities, that kind of thing. So I'd really recommend that you think about the selection criteria depending on, whether you have sales teams or individual account execs that will work with you. So you want some ABM friendly account execs to do this with, because again, when you're thinking about the account selection criteria, you want to make sure that they're on board and you're working with them in order to generate this. Basically, it's a map of criteria that you want to put in place, and you've got total confidence in that you will be able to measure accurately. And also, don't forget, I think this is something that you could start with a level of criteria, and you can grow this over time. This is not a one and done. This is something that should grow as your ABM strategy grows, as your business goals grow or change. And also, if you've got, maybe certainly in the one-to-one accounts, maybe these are like big customers, multi-year deals. So you want to make sure that the criteria is actually going to be meaningful over maybe the life cycle of the deal, for etc. So there is a lot to think about there, but hopefully that's given a few pointers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you've raised some very interesting points. You've talked about thinking about the 4 Rs. That's, I think, very critical. And I like the fact that you've added retention in there, especially at this time dealing with existing customers. That's a big factor of measuring retention and increase in expansion in accounts. I love the fact that you talked about ABM friendly sales executives. And I feel like that is so critical. Can you talk a little bit about why you think that is important when you're doing account selection?
Absolutely. So if you're trying to prove the value of ABM, what you need to do is to you've got to identify a couple of account execs that are going to work with you and then become evangelists for you. That's a great way of showing the value, proving the value, and allowing you to expand. But also, if you've got account owners that are really engaged and they are easily engaged and they appreciate the value of ABM and the level of collaboration needed, that's really critical, especially for these one-to-one accounts and also on some of these one-to-few. So for us, we're looking at those vertical clusters. We're going to be working with the account exec that owns those accounts within those clusters. So we're going to get to know them really very well. So, they need to understand the value that we're bringing to them and what they are able to do with the account. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but I can say it because a seller told me this. He said salespeople are greedy and lazy. So as long as we have to think about that. Not all of them are that, of course. He was being a bit flippant, but I get the point. It's about being able to really demonstrate very clearly the value of what it is that we're bringing as ABMers into the account and into the business. And it's not about him meeting his number or her meeting her number, but it's about how we can support that and ultimately driving to business goals. So yeah, it's really important. And I have to say as well, once you get an evangelist or two on board, I mean, again, we've had some really great examples where we get folded arms and hard stares when we start talking about, posting on social media and using LinkedIn and tools like that, which are fantastic tools to engage with accounts. But actually, if we start showing and proving, all of a sudden those naysayers become the I want more, very quickly. So yeah, it's a really interesting one. But developing relationships with the salespeople that you're working with on ABM, you must have that. Otherwise, it's just going to make your life really painful, really difficult, and you want somebody to support you and not start saying, "Oh, it doesn't work," because that's obviously going to curtail what it is that you're trying to do. So yeah, that's my recommendation.
Rachel, I completely understand that, and I think that's really critical. And a lot of people, I feel like, go into ABM not understanding that how important that dynamic is, and have a lot of challenges. And I love how you bring that even into account selection. That selecting accounts, that relationship is going to be a criteria. What are some of the data points that are usually key for making decision? Obviously, we've touched on a few, but what are some of the other ones that are key for decision making for either account or vertical selection, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think that this is a really interesting one because data points are really important, but also don't forget there's the subjective part of validation as well. So especially when it comes to thinking about the account relationship, but this is about what can you measure. So, for us, we're looking at things like, I'm just going to maybe run through a list of what it is that we're looking at. So, we're a SaaS business. We're looking at annual recurring revenue and also understanding expiring annual revenue. So within that, we're looking at things like the size of IT budget, share of wallet, product penetration. Those three are really pretty critical to actually understanding what that looks like and how that colors the landscape that we've got within our customer base. What's the value and the potential to grow over whatever the time frame is that's relevant for your business. And also maybe there's multi-year subscription agreements. Maybe you're looking at the number of users of your product, the number of active users of your product. Are we throughout the account? Also then thinking about the overlap of geographic footprint to offer larger revenue opportunities. So there's, a lot to think about in terms of that. And that's an interesting one to have with a conversation with the sellers, because often they're sort of geographically based, but you might have a customer or two or several that are, multi-geo. So that's another piece of the puzzle that you need to be able to navigate and think about. But talking about, larger revenue opportunities, that will often, switch the conversation favorably towards ABM and what it is that you're trying to do there. And then, if you're working with partners, what's their presence within the account? Can they help accelerate deals or grow your footprint within the customer? What does your future deal landscape look like, for example? That's another area that we need to consider, especially perhaps, again, if you're going after the one-to-one customers, and what does that look like in terms of, potentially looking at revenue opportunity over a certain, number of years. And then it's around, things like what's going on within the account itself. So there might be sort of like levels of change within the account. These could be external factors that can create an opportunity for your business. So it could be like transformation programs, or perhaps going through acquisition, or merger. Again, those are opportunities to think about for the business. And then, we talked about the account relationship. So, and this is really critical because often, when we're having conversations with the sellers, it's like really something that comes out of their mouths very quickly, which is, what we need to build on reputation, and we need to build on our relationships, and you do that for us and we'll take care of the revenue. It's that kind of thing. But it's about, understanding what the relationship is that they have within the account. And often there might be sort of like, a sweet spot of decision makers that they're going with, but do they know actually who the C-suite is, the infamous C-suite that we all seem to be hankering after? But do they know who they are? Do they have relationships with them? Is that something that we need to think about as part of the overall strategy? and also then thinking about, the buying committee. There's a lot of influences in there. Typically, could be like line of business versus a particular persona that you might be already know well, and that's kind of like the sweet spot for the seller. But often, these deals that could be complex are working with a lot of different line of business and a lot of different influencers across different sectors of the customer footprint. So it's it can be kind of quite complex, and I'm really worried actually, because I'm describing a lot here, but I think ultimately it's about picking what's right. It's what can you measure, and it's starting from that, because to be able to generate, because this is basically what you're doing, is you're putting this criteria together to generate a 360-degree view of your customer. That's what you're doing. And if you're starting out on one-to-many, then you might want to think about simplifying that criteria and maybe, honing that down to like 5 things that, you can measure to start you off. There's things like that. So I think, you've got to pick and choose carefully, but think about what you can practically measure, because then you'll start to think about, you'll quickly identify the gaps, put it that way.
I love that you said that, because I think you provided such a comprehensive list. And some people might be listening to this and they're like, oh my goodness, like that looks like a massive amount of work for me to just get past the account selection. How am I going to get there? And if they're starting, I feel like it would be daunting. And I see this also from on our agency side when we work with clients, and maybe we have one of our junior strategists working on a client, and they get very quickly they get very overwhelmed, because they're like, oh, I gotta consider all these data points and think about everything to select the perfect accounts. And I feel like you do want to strive for perfection, but you have to be very careful. You could be overwhelmed very quickly if you want to start with perfect. And that's a bit of a challenge. So I love the fact that you said that you have to think about simplification if you're starting at the if you're starting that ABM journey.
Yeah, and I think this is where the folks that you've got within, maybe it's the BI team, or whether it's a broader operations team, whatever that looks like, but it's the folks that are they've got their hands on the data, and they're going to help you to craft the dashboard or the report or whatever it is the output is that you need in order to surface the data that maps into the account selection criteria that you've chosen. And just even having those kinds of conversations really helps to make this a really pragmatic conversation. Because if you go to a sales person, they'll want the 360 like immediately, but often it's a journey. So it's about working with the operations folks, understanding what you can measure, making sure that it's accurate. That's the other thing. And then it's about repeated reviews with the sellers, and then you'll be able to grow the criteria as you start to think about how you measure reputation, how you measure relationship, how you measure the engagement that your accounts are having through your ABM programs and your campaigns. So it's things like that I think that can get you going. And one of my mantras is 80% is good enough, and I think that's not a bad way to start and a bad way to think. This will be a living, breathing thing. So that's the other advice I would get, is it something like this shouldn't be set in stone per se. It's good to be consistent for a while to make sure that you're getting what you need from it. So, let it run for a good length of time before you kind of switch gears, but you can always add to it. I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
I love that. I love 80% is good enough. And I think that's it's very similar to, what is that saying? The perfect is the enemy of good. No, is it perfect is the enemy of done, or something in those lines, that if you're aiming for perfection, you really risk getting a task done. So I love that 80% is good enough. One of the other things that I wanted to touch on is the opportunity growth within the account. And we've touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to know if there's anything else you wanna kind of further elaborate there in terms of how do you define opportunity growth when you're looking at your target accounts?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on what your business model is, right? So I think it's about, well, for us, it's around, it goes back to that share of wallet. So how much of what's being sold is being used? That's what we are looking at. That's what we're focusing on because this then is about adoption, and that's a big part of the customer lifecycle piece of our ABM programs. So it's understanding that. So understanding how much of what is being sold is being used, and then understanding the share of wallet. So how broad are you within your customer? That will be able to be a really good indicator as to your current footprint, but also what the expansion opportunity is. And do you know the size of budget that they have? I don't know what it could be. It could be like an IT budget or whatever, wherever it is that you're trying to get into. Do you know what that overall size of their budget actually is? Because that also gives you a really pragmatic way of measuring what that growth opportunity is within the company.
I love it. And it's just so critical to know that information. So what is the size of budget? What share of it do you have? I think that's very critical piece of information. Who are again, this is something we've touched on a little bit, but I'd love to dive a little bit deeper. In your opinion, who are the people in the organization who should be part of the conversation? We talked about kind of the account managers and the sales executive. You also brought up kind of the maybe marketing ops, sales ops, rev ops people to help you with data. Who are some of the other people that one or marketers need to bring into the conversation for a successful account selection or vertical selection?
Yeah, so when you're thinking about some of the other R's outside of revenue, okay, so this is where it gets a bit interesting. And I think that, if you're looking at the reputation that you have, often we're looking at things like NPS score or customer health score, however that's defined. Normally that sits with a group that's responsible for customer success. So if you've got a customer success team, go speak with them, understand what it is that they have in terms of data, because often it might be that they are looking at maybe slightly different data set, different view. They might be even using different tools, technologies in order to track what they need to track. But ultimately, that they are a group of people that would be incredibly useful to go talk to them to understand a little bit more about, the reputation that you have. And then the other group that, especially when it comes back to verticals, I'm just going to sort of circle back on that one a bit too, because this is where if you're going to be picking verticals, you need experts within your organization that can actually talk to these folks in their language. So we're very fortunate because we have what we call our sort of field CTOs. And they have specialisms within certain verticals. And also we have specialists that are maybe a little bit more technical in nature too, that also have a vertical expertise. So being able to have that, I think, is actually really critical if you're going to go for a vertical strategy, because you must be able to demonstrate that you've got that expertise and can talk customer language. So, this isn't going to be about a seller going into the account on their own. This is about making sure that they've got, the right subject matter experts with them throughout the customer journey, whatever stage that the customer is actually in. So being able to talk the customer language is really critical. So those are probably a couple of other groups that I would think about as you go through this journey.
Interesting. If somebody doesn't have a quote unquote SME subject matter expert internal, is that game over? What are your suggestions in that situation?
It'll make life hard, but I think that in terms of your other options then are around, external, of which there are, a large pool. There's a large pool to choose from. So whether this is, influencers within vertical space, or whether it's, certain bodies that are experts within a particular vertical space, third parties. I mean, we do a lot with some of those folks. Also, there are other groups and organizations like, IDC, IDG that also have, vertical expertise. A lot of analyst firms will also have got a vertical expertise as well. So it should be a nice happy blend. But I think that, the magic is that if you've got somebody internally that you can tap into, then that really gives a sense of authenticity to what it is that you're talking to the customer about, because you're talking their language. But it also helps to obviously endorse that if you're coming through from third party as well. So yeah, that's a happy blend of both. I think it would be ideal.
Got it. Let's turn the conversation and go back to sales.
Mm-hmm.
What are the conversations that you think are important for marketers to have with the sales team?
I think
especially, sorry to interrupt, but especially when it comes to account and vertical selection.
Yeah, so I think you've got to have a really good, honest conversation, right? So a lot of this is going to be about budget. A lot of this is going to be about bandwidth. Let's get real. So it's about setting the right expectation, because, if you talk to a seller, maybe they've got accounts which are part of your one-to-many and one-to-few and maybe one-to-one. I don't know, that might happen. But, the seller will care very much about the group of accounts that he's responsible for, or whatever their world looks like. But you need to have a really good, solid conversation, and that is about setting expectations in terms of what is needed and where ABM fits within their account plan. So if the ABM is fitting within the account plan, then that means that they are warm to what it is that you're doing. They're going to be collaborative and working with you. If ABM is okay, I don't know what ABM is, help me understand it, then that's a different conversation that you need to have. So things might be a little bit slower. And also, I think it's about, making them understand the value that you can bring to the table. So often, the research and insight phase that is needed around the any account, whether it's vertical cluster, whether it's a specific vertical customer that you've got, or anything to do with the account criteria in general, you've got to have that in place so that you can come to the table and to the seller and actually have the conversation around, look, this is what we understand about the account. If you can show what's going on, the intent that customer has, and the landscape in terms of what they know today, that's going a really long way to getting that 360 view, which is what the account owner will actually need. So it's about keeping it real. And I would say, there's ABM are typically really amazing problem solvers, and maybe we have a bit of a tendency to say yes, but I think actually at this time, in order to be really effective, you've got to be real about what it is that you can actually achieve with the seller. And I would suggest that that's a good way to actually start the conversation. Then it's about, what's ongoing and having those regular reviews. And I think keeping that communication line open is also really important, because it makes the account exec understand that you're working with them on the account, and that you're part of conversation. So when you're having, deal workshops, win workshops, labs, whatever it is that you're doing, that it's and where does ABM fit? How can ABM support? And you're part of the team on the account, or that group of accounts, and that's what's going to move the needle for you.
Got it. Okay. So let's look at this a little bit holistically now.
Mm-hmm.
I come together and I bring all the data together, and I have maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe 15 different criteria that I'm measuring. And you would put some weight behind every single criteria, and you would say, hey, if this is in this situation, if we have an ARR of between this amount and this amount, or this amount or that amount, these are the scores that I provide to these. And this is how much ARR is important for me. you go through that process, you have your criteria that we've talked about in details, you've had your conversations with the sales team, you've got the data from the RevOps team, you have you've put everything together. Is there a way to test, and let's say you put your accounts through there and you get an account score? And by the way, it would be good to clarify, is that the way that you usually approach it?
Yes, absolutely. A weighting score to the criteria that you've got is really critical because that helps you surface those one-to-one, one-to-few accounts, and then the rest is often the many, one-to-many.
Got it. Okay. So my question is this: once you do that, and you've taken X number of accounts through that process, and every account now has a score, is there a way to make sure that you're on the right track? You have the right accounts with the right score, and because it's still scary, right? You have taken it through the program, and it's like, this is it. Is there a way to test and make sure that you are on the right track?
Yes. Happily, I can say yes. So honestly, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to roll your sleeves up and you've got to eyeball the data with the account exec. That's the first thing you've got to do. Does it make sense? Is it what they're expecting? It's a really interesting process because this is where the whole topic of, some slightly subjective validation actually is needed because, what you're doing is showing them the data that should be validating the strategy for the sellers and for the business. That's ultimately what you're doing here. So the first thing is to eyeball the data, have the conversation. It might be that the scoring need to be adjusted, or maybe one of the criteria suddenly doesn't make sense. It's so funny when you start looking at, I don't know whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or whether it's in a dashboard or whatever it is, the delivery of the data that comes back. When you're actually looking at something that's really black and white, it does make you perhaps rethink, and it gives you opportunity to rethink. So that's one way of doing it. But also the other way of doing testing is, I think, through digital. So there's lots of tools out there. I'm just going to pick on like Demandbase or Terminus, one of those kind of platforms, because that's a really good way to understand your customer base and also how your criteria might allow you to best engage with them through a tool like that. So it's I would always recommend going small. So and small could mean various things. It could be not a vertical, but maybe it's a cluster of accounts within a vertical that's in a particular territory or country or geography. I think something that you have to decide what a robust test grouping size would actually look like for you and how long you need to test that for. So if this is going to be foundational for you, don't rush it. This is something that you want to be able to come back because this is going to help you to prove the value to the business. But I think it's about, for us, eyeballing the data, doing some of that digital testing, and just having that conversation, because when you start to see that data black and white in front of you, it makes the criteria seem real and really does understand and hone in where it is that you need to focus. So those would be my recommendations.
Rachel, we've covered a wide range of topics when it comes to both vertical and account selection. Now, I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you, but before we kind of get to those, is there anything else that you think I haven't asked or it's important for us to cover when it comes to account selection and account and vertical selection?
I think that my recommendation is to make sure that this is like an iterative process. Like I said, it's a living, breathing thing. So what you start with, you might want to run that for 6-9 months or whatever it is. That's a decent amount of time for your business. But the point is that this could actually change, and morph and change. It might be that you've got slightly different account selection criteria for different geographies, even. Something else might be a little bit more important. So this is something that could either be as simple and straightforward as you want to make it, or it could be something that's incredibly complex. And I guess it's down to understanding and remembering what the what the tools you have at your fingertips are, what you can actually measure, I think is the important focus. And then growing from there, I think is, probably what I would say.
Fantastic.
Have you read the State of ABM and APAC report yet? If you have, you'll know that 59% of marketing leaders are intending to increase their ABM investment in the coming year. Even bigger news is 0% of survey respondents are going to decrease their investment. It's an exciting time for ABM in the region. Discover the state of account-based marketing in APAC today. Download the full report at abm.xgrowth.com.au/report. That's abm.xgrowth.com.au/report.
Okay, let's do some rapid fire questions. So the first thing I want to ask is, what is one resource? This could be a book, a blog, a podcast, whatever it is that has had a profound impact on the way that you work or you live. What comes to mind?
Oh, I do love a proper book with pages that I can turn. And so there's a book called Strength to Strength by Arthur C. Brooks. It's an amazing book. I actually read it on holiday a couple of years ago, actually. Now I'm just trying to think what the time frame was. But it's about building a content life, and it's absolutely incredible. And I've read it many times since then, and I honestly wish I'd read it in my 30s, because I think it just gives a whole different way of looking at how to build contentment and happiness in life. So yeah, a bit deep and meaningful, but that is a life changer.
Strength to Strength. I got to check this out. No, thank you very much for that. Okay. Question number 2. If you could give only one piece of advice to B2B marketers, what would it be?
80% is good enough. Honestly, that's my mantra.
I was waiting for it.
Yeah, I think we're so hard on ourselves. We have to be, especially as digital, any marketing, but especially with digital, what we've got at our fingertips. Don't wait until something's baked and perfect. Go test, go have fun, go and be innovative, because that's how we learn. That's what makes our job so amazing.
80% is good enough. Rachel, who are some of the influencers that you follow, whether it's in the marketing space or even larger, space? Some of the people that you listen to regularly or you follow regularly.
I'm quite a big fan of Dragon's Den. So there's a guy there called Stephen Bartlett who has a CEO diary, and it's a really good series of. I guess it's a program that kind of explores all sorts of different things that happens with CEOs, but also he's kind of branched out and sort of looking at a lot to do with mental health, which I think is it's a really interesting area, and especially going through pandemic and working at home and having to deal with that, and sort of that our mental well-being, I think, has really been heightened as a result of that. So he's a really good one that I enjoy listening to. There's also another guy called Daryl Scott. He specializes in neuro-linguistic programming. And if you don't know what that is, go and look it up. That also is life-changing. I think it's also life-changing as an ABMer. If you're trying to work with, an account exec that's looking after a really big strategic account, being able to work with them on that at an NLP level it definitely does make life a lot easier. And then if I can squeeze in my last one, I would be really remiss if I didn't include Bev Burgess in this. So I've known Bev for quite a number of years, and her books are on my bookshelf, and I reference them frequently. And I love listening to her, whether she's speaking at a conference or just even part of groups and small roundtables and things like that, which I've had opportunity to speak with her at. So yeah, she's a huge influencer in terms of what we're doing with our ABM. And today too, we're working with her today, which is great.
Fantastic. I mean, Bev is pretty much an absolute legend in the ABM circle, so I can completely agree with you. Last question I have, Rachel, is what is something that excites you about B2B today?
I would say that we are finally recognizing there's more to life than the demand waterfall. We know that B2B It's right across the customer life cycle. And that's really exciting because I think that, perhaps a lot of us have been stuck in the middle of the funnel for a while. And, it's all about that consideration decision. But actually, no, there's a lot more that happens post sale. So that retention, adoption, expansion opportunities that you have. And don't forget advocacy. And that's a beautiful thing when an ABM program comes to fruition. You've got amazingly happy customers and they want to go tell other customers how happy they are. I mean, that's a really fantastic thing to be able to achieve. So yeah, more to life than waterfall.
Love it. Rachel, this was an amazing conversation. And I absolutely love that. There is so much insight that you've shared and so many interesting points that I think a lot of our listeners are going to take a fair bit of note. I know I've written down heaps of stuff. So just want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast and giving us your time.
You're really welcome. I really enjoyed it too. Thanks for having me.
Today's episode of Growth Colony was produced by Alexander Hipwell and Liza Maywald. It was edited by Dave Samito with additional editing by Liza Maywald and music arrangement by Alexander and Liza. Special thanks to Tina Wabe. We couldn't make the show without you. Growth Colony is hosted by Shaheen Hoda, Director of Growth at XGrowth. If you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Do you think you'd be a great guest or just keen for a chat? Send through an email at podcast@xgrowth.com.au. That's podcast@xgrowth.com.au. That's all for now. We'll catch you next week, right here on Growth Colony.